Let's go!
Marvel vs. Capcom Collection is out. I delayed my review a few days. The reason being, I've had situations in the past where I've released fighting game reviews and I don't have the entirety of the games online available to me pre-release. You just get some people, but you really don't know how a fighting game works until you get like the day one or past the day one blues, or you see how it functions with a large variety of players. This is just the same thing for most fighting games, right? So I wanted to wait just a few days, and now we're like the second day. I'm like 5 hours into playing several games online, mostly MVC2, but a few others, and got a pretty good feel on how everything kind of is. Got a pretty good feel on everything. Let's talk about things outside of just one of its core features, which is online. I think it's hard for me to sort of validate this for some people, because some people will look at a collection like this, they'll see X-Men Children of the Atom, and they'll go like, oh, that's some old game from like 25 years ago. That's cool, or something like that. Or they'll go back and you'll see a game like Marvel vs. Capcom 1, and you're like, oh, you know, that's neat. These are just these old-ass 2D games. Realistically, though, these games have not been available since the 90s. The majority of them have actually never had, in this case, maybe not in this case, but in this case, actual true close to faithful arcade versions, where they are pretty dang close to the perfect arcade version. X-Men vs. Street Fighter, notoriously, there's a Saturn version, but there's also a lot of differences in the Saturn version. The same thing with this one. This is the first time ever in history that we have gotten these games in an actual real release in some way. So it's a big deal, dude. I think if we're talking about this collection purely on a value level to the games that are in it and the executions of the games therein, this is the best fighting game collection Capcom has ever made. And that's talking on a game quality thing. Capcom Fighting Collection 1 was really good. Fighting Collection 2 also looks really good and is the second best, but I think the best one, even knowing what is in Capcom Fighting Collection 2, this is still the best one. For sure. There's a lot of cool stuff going down in the future for Fighting Game Collection 2, but if we're to talk about Marvel Origins and, you know, previous Capcom collections going back to the PlayStation, all this shit, that is nothing compares to how many games are in here and what high quality these games are. So much so that back in the day, when there was another MBC collection released, it composed of Marvel 1 and Marvel Superheroes. And it didn't primarily do too well because so many people were like, where's the other games, dude? Where's X-Men vs. Street Fighter? Where's Coda? Where's MSH VSF? And it's like, and that game didn't sell well. It actually did not do well. There was another MVC collection that happened back in 2012 called MVC Origins, and it was just MVC 1 and Marvel Superheroes, and it did poorly, dude. And it's because it's not what everybody wanted. People think of the MVC collection, and they think of a lot of games. As I said, talking on what makes a quality collection good, what makes a collection of games good, your ability to even play that shit outside of emulation. Emulation sort of renders everything null and void, right? Because of course you can play it. What is our ability to play Punisher nowadays? What's our ability to play Marvel 2, Marvel 1, X-Men vs. Street Fighter? What is our ability to even play this shit? For almost all the games on here, null and void. Been taken away, came back, taken away again. To me, that's where the ultimate value of this collection is. As an example, Capcom has made several other collections in the past few years, I'd say actually 10 years, that are extremely high quality collections. The Mega Man Legacy Collection, the Mega Man X Collection, the Battle Network Collection, like a lot of these are amazing to fit all those games together in some way. However, when push comes to shove and you're an actual like a fan of those games and you've played a lot of them, you start to realize on an input level, they kind of suck, dude. Mega Man 2 feels like you're playing that shit online with delay-based netcode through Parsec. Most people won't even have a problem with that, but those collections are still considered good, even though to me, they're not particularly good. And another good example of this is the Street Fighter 30th Anniversary Collection, which I had a lot of gripes about. There was a lot of games in there. It reviewed very well. It sold extremely well. But to me, there was problems. Like the way those games sort of worked and the way they handled the online functionality of them and how they felt to even play was not good. This is like the worst version of this game. I don't know what the heck we're doing here. There's another port of this, like Third Strike, like several years before. It's way better. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm looking at this collection in terms of game quality, game availability. How good do the games actually even play? And this is why I started talking so much about the input delay that all these games effectively are going to have to deal with because it is emulation. Input delay is going to be a real thing. Emulation is not a guarantee that something will run one-to-one. It does its best to get as close as possible. I'm very happy to say in several of the games in here that I have like many years of experience going back to me being very young and coming back to it and doing all this shit feels mad good. Like, feels even better than MVC1 in the Marvel vs. Capcom Origins collection, just as an example of what we're talking about on here. And it was the same thing for Marvel 2 when I played Marvel 2 pre-release, and now I was like, here's the thing, I played the Dreamcast version every once in a while. I didn't feel a difference. It's kind of nuts to me that MVC1 can feel this good. This is the game I remember, dude. This feels like I'm playing on a CRT. It's really cool. To me, that value in itself is that the quality of each of the titles therein, Capcom went to an extreme amount of preservance and like at least reference to the older titles to get them to be this good. And that's amazing to me. That's amazing that we got to that point, that this shit can actually be as good as possible. Like, I love it. And that isn't even talking about all the extra stuff. We talked about the game quality, the games they're in, how good the games actually play, the best of any collection that Capcom has probably ever released. But there is more stuff. There is museum. There is like achievement stuff in here if you're looking for that kind of stuff. I'm not really looking for this stuff. But yeah, like gallery-wise, there is artwork in this collection I have never seen before. People were talking about how in Marvel 2, there is referential artwork somewhere in here that I have to show you. As someone that has been following the art of Marvel vs. Capcom my nearly whole life, there's stuff in here I've never seen before. Pulled it out of like the archives. Dr. Doom has concept art of him effectively being Cable, where early on like a design level, they were gonna make Dr. Doom more Cable-like, or they effectively took, here it is, they were gonna have Doom be a much different character than he was in Marvel Superheroes. And where's his Hyper Viper? Hold on a second. Where is it? Look at all this crazy Doom shit, dude. Look at this. There's Thanos. One of them in here is him actually doing the Hyper Viper beam. I can't remember where it is. There it is, top left. My face is covering it. Top left. That's Doom doing the Hyper Viper, and apparently the note at the top is saying in Japanese, somebody told me this, that maybe you could like wiggle the stick and it will move more. Dr. Doom originally had Hyper Viper beam. That's amazing. That we never knew that shit. But eventually Doom didn't get all this crazy shit that's in here, you know. There's concepts of more stuff for Thanos and Magneto and, you know, all of the like that are incredibly cool. But the nice part is that no, they just didn't pull out a whole bunch of artwork that had been around before and just use that. They dug into the coffee stain shit. Insanely high resolution scans of each one. These are so high res, man. It's crazy how high res they are. A substantial amount of space on this game is honestly dedicated to the artwork. And that is not normal. I have never seen this image in this high fidelity before. I have never seen it. The closest we've gotten is like posters. And then I started scrolling as someone that has been drawing these characters since high school. Here's the big one that got me. I was like, oh my God, the Strider image. I used to draw this back in high school. And I zoomed in, and I zoomed in, and I zoomed in, and I zoomed in, and I have never seen these details before. I've actually legit never seen the details in this shit before, because you can't even, they just didn't exist. So to me, there's clearly a love here. So to me, that's one of the things that makes me the most happy about some parts of this collection, is that there is a deep appreciation for the artwork of these games. And the art of the Marvel vs. Capcom series is very deeply rooted in the art community across the world. The fact that this game celebrates all of that, I love it. So anyway, that means a lot. There's no extra modes. There's no like really crazy things you can do. You can go and fight arcade versions. There's no boss rush. That would have been great. Let's talk about the last part of the review, online. There's score challenging, there's leaderboards, but there will be no content vultures for Marvel vs. Capcom 2. The game doesn't even have a friggin' replay system, dude. That exists in things like Fightcade. So the online is pretty bare bones. It's bare bones, but functional is kind of what it is. The online's pretty good, and we played a lot of matches. For the most part, the most important thing about the online of these games, especially a game like Marvel vs. Capcom 2, which is where a lot of the criticism and everyone's going to be asking, how does Marvel 2 run online? Really good. I think my final review is it runs really good. There is some caveats though. When you start up a game, it will ask you an input delay option. And that input delay option is pretty important because the game runs so precise that there's not much input delay for the game in general in an offline/online setting. If you have it set to here, that's like Dreamcast version, right? However, and I will say with some criticism of this online, some things in Marvel 2 just move too fast for rollback netcode. Just in general, I would have to put 2 to 3 bars of input delay for the game to even account for where Magneto is on the screen and how fast he is moving. Will this affect 99.99999% of players? Not really. This will not be an issue for you. If you're wondering if this is something that will affect you personally, it already doesn't affect you. And here's the thing where it's not exactly a negative against this collection. This happens in the other versions too. Magneto does this to the other copies of the game. He does this to the Fightcade versions. He does this to PS3 360 versions. He historically has such a goddamn fast dash that this is not a thing that is new. He's so good and he moves so fast that he will like break the visuals of the game online. I specifically asked a bunch of players that have been playing this shit for like 10 to 20 years consistently, and they're like, oh, that's normal. Yeah, his dash is too fast. He fucks the game up. So you just have to make sure you fight against Magneto players that have better connections, you know? And if your connection's good, it's mostly okay. If it's like a yellow bar, if it is a orange bar and you're fighting a Magnus, your shit's gonna get fucked up. It's not really a giant negative on the game because it really only affects one character and it only affects a subsect of the community that is extremely small. People that can even do that. Not every MSP is gonna be able to do that shit to you, but there's a chance they will, you know? The netcode is good. The biggest praise I can give this collection, especially from Marvel 2, is that you can go online and do your wild, crazy bullshit that you have been practicing for 20 years, and guess what? It works. For a game that is as nuanced as Marvel 2 and has so many different outcomes of things that can be fucked up and not work, it works. I'm watching people do Sentinel fly-on-fly combos. I'm watching Chaos, arguably one of the best players of the game right now, fight me with Shuma Gorath and do disgusting Shuma Gorath shit. I'm like, what am I even looking at, dude? It's cool. Like, it's cool to see that players that have been practicing this shit where the skill ceiling goes forever are able to apply that to this game, a completely different version of Marvel vs. Capcom 2 than they've ever played. And speaking of the other games that I played online, X-Men vs. Street Fighter, Marvel 1, they played great. They played better than the Origins collection that I personally played a ton of back in 2012. They feel really goddamn good. The online element of this is not perfect because clearly there's a matchmaking issue right now, almost across the board, exacerbated by the PC version. It's just kind of hard to get matches. That's something that I do hope gets fixed. And some people are having an easier time than others. Here, the Switch version matchmaking is running pretty dang good. Effectively, like the online, very good. Is it absolute perfection? It's not, but it's very good. Last but not least, let's talk about negatives. The biggest negatives I have of this collection is that most of them specifically come down to MVC2, I would say. And the criticisms I have of MVC2 is that this is a lesser version of Marvel 2 than we got 15 years ago. This is a lesser version of MVC2 than the PS3 360 release. Specifically, almost intentional. It is not based on the Dreamcast source code that they used back in the Digital Eclipse days / Backbone Entertainment. This is a Marvel 2 based on arcade version, which has actually never been released before. Runs super close to the Dreamcast and feels amazing. But MVC2, back on the PS3 360, was 100% more feature rich. You know, has better quality audio, has better looking visuals, has stages that are actually in 16:9. There are a lot of wonderful quality of life features in that version of Marvel 2 that don't make it here. And this version of Marvel 2 has to suffer the same problems the arcade version does, which is hella compressed audio, a 480p resolution, and, you know, clearly some visual stuff that got touched up a lot better in later releases. I technically put that as a negative, that this is, you know, in some ways a much better version of Marvel 2 than that version. Because guess what? PS3 and 360 version had fucking problems. There's a few gameplay weirdness things in here. We found like a few things. Some audio things are messed up. Some, you know, things aren't acting the way they should. Juggernaut glitch sort of just disappeared. You know, Thanos has a busted thing on his TAC that just doesn't work at all right now. But compared to the laundry list that the PS3 360 version had, and they eventually had to patch a lot of that, this is extremely close. Probably one of the closest to authentic Marvel vs. Capcom 2 experiences you can have. And the biggest one is input delay. That PS3 360 version had a lot of input delay. This game feels amazing to play offline. Feels like a dream. If you're playing online, even with a minimal amount of input delay, it still feels like a dream. I just played the Dreamcast version not that long ago. It is no shit close. Actual data came out. People went in and frame tested the whole game, every single game in the collection. Oh shit, Marvel 2 does run close to parity with Dreamcast. And I need to tell you, that has almost never existed in any of the Capcom fighting game collections ever. There's a balance here. Yeah, the old version of the game had a lot of great visual upgrades, which was nice, but it didn't play entirely the best it possibly could. This one is missing those visual upgrades, is more true to the arcade version, but the gameplay's on point. Like, the game feels really good with not that many things that are messed up. There are improvements I would have loved to have seen, you know? I think those visual upgrades, I do miss them. I think I love the fact that those things are the way they were. The fact that the game has no crossplay overall is kind of a bummer. I can't in good conscience, like, give the collection the highest review in the world. I think on a critical level, with what the games have to offer, with some of them being effectively bare bones and a lot of the artwork kind of filling out everything, the online being kind of basic for all the games, not nearly as feature rich as some of the older collections like Marvel Origins and stuff like that, I do feel that the game is about like a 9. And it mostly comes back to the fact of the games included. What games are actually in here, because that is what makes a collection. It is the entire point of a collection is what games are in there. Doesn't matter. It can be the best feeling, the best looking shit of all time. But if the games aren't what you want, then it sucks. So again, on a critical level, it's not absolutely perfect. It isn't. I think it is a 9. It's the best collection Capcom has ever released, and it's one of the best feeling collections they've ever released as well. But I think for me personally, it's a 9.5. The only reason it doesn't hit a perfect 10 for me, the biggest Marvel vs. Capcom weeb of them all, is because I do miss some of those visual upgrades and quality of life things. I think it would have been amazing if we got the ability to rematch quicker in games like Marvel vs. Capcom 2, if they were able to get deep into the meat of that game and do that. I would have really liked that. And I think those were things a lot of existing players of MVC2 specifically were looking forward to. But I understand why they didn't do that. It is closer to the arcade version. I am beyond happy. I was playing for the first 2 hours before my fingers started bleeding. I had the biggest smile on my face because I had not experienced this shit in forever. The only time I've experienced this is playing my friends in my house, and not everybody gets the ability to do that.